Patrick, you can always send her a link and tell her to hop on.
She's probably watching.
Well, tell her to
Go
hop
for
on.
it. Go for
All
it.
right. All right. We are live.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. It's so much fun to talk to JT Ellison all the time, but I really am excited about telling you about this wonderful book. This is the cover, the outside cover for The Wolves Come at Night, but I want you to look at this gorgeous reverse. Look at this on the inside. I mean, how many of us really ever take off the dust jackets, right? So I wanted to make a point in telling you about this. So we're going to be talking about Two Tails Press, which is a wonderful venture that JT is doing and which has published this book. So what we're going to do is we're going to accumulate orders for autographed copies, and then JT is going to send them to us. So we don't really have, we have actually one in stock at the moment. So this is your chance over the next, say, 2 weeks to go ahead and order a copy, and then we'll go from there. So JT, tell us about this gorgeous cover design. Is this your own work or someone else's?
I wish that was mine. My concept, my incredible artist, Kim Killian's execution. We talked at length about this Janus twin wolf head that I really wanted. She had done an original cover that had this incredibly stylized stone wolf kind of on the gate. And I loved it, but it was too much, right? You know, sometimes there's just too many elements to a cover. And I said, but I want to take that, and can you make like a chess piece out of it with the twins? And they represent Taylor Jackson, who is obviously the hero of this book, and Angélie Delacroix, who is the anti-hero of this book.
But together they are a truly formidable pair, although
Yes,
you have
really
to read the book to discover whether that really holds or whether it goes bad. And now, in order to understand that, I think we have to go back to, this is the 10th Taylor Jackson.
Ninth. Well, 10th if you include the short story that is the prequel to this.
I was. Right. All right. 9th full novel. And the one before it, was that Whiteout?
Yes.
Okay. So we're going to have to backtrack to that just a little bit. But before we do that, let's talk a moment about why it has been a gap since Taylor Jackson and why you've chosen Two Tails Press to publish Taylor Jackson.
So, as happens in publishing, sometimes books don't do what people want them to do. And sometimes the market changes, and sometimes new trends really take hold. Police procedurals started to go by the wayside, and standalone suspense thrillers really took off. And I had always wanted to write a standalone suspense thriller. I kind of modeled my career after Laura Lippman and Harlan Coben. They both started in in mass market paperback. They wrote several books, established themselves as authors, and then wrote a big breakout standalone. And that's what I wanted to do. The publisher and I weren't on the same page. They weren't ready for the big breakout standalones. They wanted the series to continue. And I had spun off with a new series with Samantha Owens, who is the best friend and lodestone to Taylor in the earlier books. And then by the time I started into the suspense world, they didn't want the Taylor books anymore. So we've gone back and forth, right? It's just really what the market will bear. Well, these kinds of books have gotten popular again, and it's been 10 years since I put one out. And I really have wanted to tell Taylor's story as it continues on. I've always seen where she was going, and I hadn't gotten her there yet. Right. We left her at a really good spot at the end of Where All the Dead Lie. She and Baldwin are, it's a good, solid place to end the series, but I wasn't done telling her story. So I wrote Whiteout, which was meant to just bridge the gap for a couple of years until I could write another Taylor book. And that came out in 12, 15. I mean, it's been a while, right? It's been a minute since we've done this. I wrote this during the pandemic. I was writing It's One of Us, and I was writing this. I was going back and forth. When I was getting frustrated with one, I would switch to the other, and I got it finished. And I really had no intention of doing anything but publishing it myself. because, it had been 10 years. Really, this is just for the readers. This isn't a book that I'm trying to make the New York Times list. I'm not trying to get a bunch of trade reviews. I'm not trying to have the industry attention. I'm trying to get it for the readers. This is truly a labor of love for the readers. And that's why Two Tales was just really the right place to do this.
So Two Tales Press is actually whom?
Moi. C'est moi. Along with several contracted, phenomenal partners who I work with, from art to editorial. I do the Joss Walker books under the Two Tales imprint. So I've got co-writers for that. I mean, it is a indie press. It is definitely not just me as a self-published author. It is an infrastructure that I've built over the years. It's been in place actually since 2012.
Well, that's really true. I mean, that's when I wrote an essay the last e-news that I sent out to our customers, in which I said that the volume, I'm sitting here when I was late to my last Zoom, looking across the room and recognizing I have 119 ARCs for July and new hardcovers. That doesn't count the over 100 trade paperbacks or the mass markets or anything else. Publishing is just booming. But as a consequence, it's getting harder and harder for any one book to get attention. And what gets attention are the books the publisher paid the most for. And it doesn't take rocket science as a bookseller to determine which books the money's going to get behind them, and they are going to be the big sellers. And a lot of other worthy books are going to kind of not. I think that small presses at this point can do as well or better than some of the big presses because there is more individualized attention, probably more love, certainly, and marketing and so forth from a person running a small press than, from a big corporate operation at the moment. So I'm trying to balance the really huge books because, we do a lot of those. In fact, last week's huge book is the new #1 bestseller in the country right now.
Yay, Mr. Carr.
Only the Dead for Mr. Carr. I just congratulated him and his publicist. But I also think it's important to support smaller books and smaller presses because they, they're great stories and people want to read them, and we don't all want to read massive bestsellers all the time. So I'm very enthused about Two Tail Press, and I think there's some chance, that you can grow it into something not huge, but maybe something a little more than you anticipated, just because of the structure of publishing at the moment.
It's very nimble, and it's kind of fascinating. So this is the first of my own books that I've published here, right? I've done short stories. I've done the Joss Walker books. This is the first J.T. Ellison novel that I've ever done indie like this. It was really fascinating yesterday watching what was happening because as the publisher, I have access to the data live. And I was kind of blown away by the support that this book got. Yesterday was a really great day. Today's a really great day. Having people like you who recognize, oh my gosh, there are many different ways up this mountain. We're just trying to tell stories and we just want the readers to be happy. And I've spent 10 years fielding emails from my readers saying, where's the Taylor? Where's Taylor? Where's Taylor? Well,
here she is.
Here, Taylor Jackson is back. It was incredibly heartening to see everything that happened yesterday. It was incredibly heartening to, see it in the bookstores, to know that finally people have it. It leaked early, and normally, we would be like, oh my God, we messed with the sales. It's just a different experience, right? I had people writing me over the weekend, I'm so sorry I got the book early. I'm like, go for it. There's no expectation. This is truly a labor of love for the readers. And it's really exciting to me to be able to do that, and that my publisher is cool with it, that everybody understands, hey, there isn't necessarily a place for this in their structure, but there is a place for it in the readers' hearts. And sometimes, without the readers, these are the people that got me where I am. This is the series that got me where I am. This is the character who got me where I am. And, we toasted Taylor last night. because, you know, without her, I would have none of this. So
Get my glass of wine. I'm all set to toast Taylor. Yay.
Cheers.
Delighted to do that. And you know, you raised a really interesting point in what you were saying, which is that genre fiction goes in and out of fashion. I've actually done quite a lot of studying on it. It's about a generational role. It's a 20-year cycle where some form of genre fiction rises up and it crests and everybody says, I've read enough of that. And then a new one comes along. And that can be broadly in terms of historical fiction, science fiction, horror is making a comeback right now, for example, which has been, and then it can be subgenres. And one of them is the police procedural. In the 1990s, the woman sleuth, Private Eye, the woman sleuth cop was dominant. Men used to sob on my shoulder and say, you know, they couldn't get a publishing contract. And then, like everything else, because there was too much of it, and people thought, okay, you know, I want to read something different. It kind of cycled down. And then we got, you know, what I didn't remember what was in the aughts. And then we got Gone Girl. And so everything went in that direction. You and I and Jane Ann Krantz have talked about the emergence of the Gothic, you know, which is making a comeback, and it's on its way up. And at some point, that wave will crest. But right now, the police procedural, I think, is making a return.
I'm back. Yeah.
And actually, police procedurals and private eye novels are among my very favorite forms. And the reason I love them is that there's a logical progression. You know, there's an instigating incident, and then, you know, everybody works forward. Sometimes you have to look backwards, but that's not really, you know, out of line until you get to a conclusion. Whereas, you know, a lot of the psychological suspense and the twists and all, which you're very good at, JT, but that's a different reading experience. And, you know, I don't want to read nothing but in one kind of fiction. I just don't. And I think that people get caught up in what's fashionable, and then they gradually realize they're bored.
I could not agree more. I mean, that's how I stay from being bored, right? Is by switching up the kinds of books that I write. If you look at what I'm reading, I mean, I'm in multiple genres, nonfiction and fiction, and you know, I'm reading Emily Henry right now. I've got Liv Constantine's book. I'm looking at what's on my so Liv Anderson, Alex Finley, Liv Constantine, but I've also got Emily Henry. I'm reading a genre book. It's just absolutely everywhere, right? And I think the readers are super smart. I don't know that we give them as much credit as we really should, because they are cool with not reading the same thing. Nobody wants chocolate cake every meal.
Well, that's true. I mean, some readers do stay in a lane, but others do not. And, you know, I recognized a little while ago that all of a sudden I was looking at a lot of really good historical fiction, Regency in part, thanks to Bridgerton, but others as well. And they were being published as paperback originals, which is, you know, a more consumable form due to the price point and, you know, portability. Let's say people might be more inclined to take it to the beach than, you know,
you're not going to ruin it like you are your pretty hardcover.
Yeah. So we started a new club, you know, which is basically the historical fiction paperback of the month, and it's doing well. So last night we had a Regency event, and tonight, you know, I'm talking to you, and tomorrow it's a cozy with Catherine Hall Page, and then it is an espionage book with Chris Howdy, and next week it's, you know, TJ Newman and her airplane thriller, and then it's a Clive Cussler and whatever. And, you know, so our book selling life is constantly varied. And I'd like to think that readers, you know, kind of follow that and figure that there's good to be read in all of these things. But anyway, now let's talk about the book, because it really is an interesting, you're not sure when you start. Is this going to be a duel, or is this going to be a cooperative thing? But you start with a really shocking incident.
I do. It is two girls on a hike. They're looking for, there's a club at Vanderbilt. They're two freshmen who have joined this club called the Latin Lounge, and they are given coordinates. And when you go and find them, it's geocaching. It's
Right.
something that was all the rage many, many years ago. And this just has a twist. You set an intention, and somebody set an intention for the meaning of life and found a book called The Meaning of Life. And so it's become this really popular thing. And they get to their coordinates, hear an argument, a shot rings out, and there's a scream, and there's a man with a gun, and they flee. And of course, you never know when there's a man with a gun if he's going to come after you. And they freak out. They call the police. The police then go up and find a body. And it turns out it is a very, very famous up and coming country singer. I've actually never touched the country music scene in Nashville in my books. This is the very first time I've done it. And it is not a deep dive into country music. She just is a country music artist. And there's a little bit of that. But that, everything stems from this. Why has she been murdered? There is a witness to the murder, and then the witness goes missing. And boom, boom, boom. Now Taylor Jackson is brought into this case. Taylor, our feral house cat, Taylor Jackson, has been bumped up to captain, and she is miserable. She is meant to be on the streets. She knows it. Her team has been disseminated. We have all the same players from the earlier books. Her entire team from the murder squad are here. So we've got Lincoln Ross, we've got Marcus Wade, but Lincoln is now the lieutenant and Marcus is the lead detective, and Joan Houston has been bumped up to commander, and Taylor is the captain. And this structure just does not work for her. And she's incredibly frustrated. She is not allowed out on the streets anymore. But this is a big, high profile case, and her commander says, we want you on this. And she's just thrilled. Somebody's throwing her a bone. She actually gets to leave her new upgraded office and her uncomfortable chair and her many meetings and get back out on the street. And of course, when that happens, the wheels come off, as they always do.
Well, there's a lot more to go on. But one thing I think it's important to realize is that Nashville is really essential to this series and to Taylor. But, JT, for a person who actually lived near Nashville and took classes at Vanderbilt and all back in the 1970s, I can hardly recognize Nashville now, even in the 10 years that you have been, in a gap. Yeah. Nashville has changed unbelievably.
Yes. Everything about this city is different than it used to be, from the people who live in it, to the culture, to the sports teams, to the architecture. Everything is different. Even the policing has changed, and it's changed rather dramatically. This book does kind of leapfrog forward through the pandemic, through Black Lives Matter, into the other side of policing, which I think is a really interesting place, because now we have a different attitude towards the police. A lot of communities have bigger issues, and a lot of Nashville's community has been focused on how to navigate the new waters. I mean, it's a new kind of policing that they're doing. And I've talked to some of them about, it gets real frustrating for them to be down on Broad with this massive influx of tourists. It's like a safe New Orleans now, right? But everybody's high, everybody's drunk. There are fights that are going on, and they have to pick and choose what to get involved in. And that's hard for them. It's really difficult. So it was really interesting going back and revisiting the police in a new environment, and how to structure that, how to make Taylor the effectual cop that she is, and still respect that we have a different world now. Yeah. And Nashville itself is just, you wouldn't recognize it. It's even from 6 months ago to now, it's different. Every time I leave my house, which I don't do a lot because I am an author. And so I do look at the world through my window, but every time I leave, there is a new building, there's a new hotel, there's a new restaurant. It's incredible, the explosion of growth. And with the explosion of growth, you have the explosion of new crime. And we've got a lot of
Absolutely
interesting
true.
crime now.
Yeah, I think the last time I was there was in 2019, and I was absolutely stunned, by all the trendy restaurants and, the congestion and the gentrification. But at the same time, it's also increased divides. And recent political events have reminded us that Tennessee, like many other states, has got a big contrast between urban and rural. And
Yeah.
the urban is bluer and, more multicultural, and the rural keeps getting redder and anti all that. I mean, it's certainly true here in Arizona, where we live in the very large Maricopa County, which is the population hub and urban, and then there are islands out there. And I'm not sure how states are going to ever bridge this, because
Don't know.
I feel like that divide is getting more and more acute, which means more tensions, more racial tensions, more economic tensions, the possibility of more crimes by tourists and to tourists, because, look what's going on in Florida. I mean, I don't have any idea. I had Dave Barry at the store a couple of weeks ago, Florida man and all the rest of it. We talked about who would be crazy enough to take on the mouse. I mean, why would you pick a fight with Disney? And yet that's going strong. And now we're seeing, the NAACP, the I never get it all right.
LGBTQ.
Thank you. I always get the initials wrong. Anyway, they're now sending out travel advisories and boycotts and things canceling stuff and all. And I wonder, where does DeSantis think he's going with this? Because the numbers are completely against it.
Well, Random House and the authors just sued.
I know, and also the Department of Education is now, talking about book banning being, it's going to be civil rights suits and all. But I look at, how backward pedaling some places are going. And then I also think that there's some that are fast forwarding too much, I think a great many of us would just like to stay in the middle,
Come back to
navigate how it's going. But you're absolutely right that the Taylor Jackson of 10 years ago can't be the Taylor Jackson that is in your book.
No.
What about her counterpart? What about the assassin? How has her life changed in the last 10 years as well?
Angélie Delacroix. One of my favorite characters that I have ever created.
She's great. She's absolutely terrific. I agree. I love reading about her, and I loved reading about their relationship, such as it is, as it bounces back and forth.
So I love the Byronic hero, right? I absolutely love, especially assassins, and we have this crazy love affair with these people who are completely immoral. They're doing things that, are illegal, amoral, all of it. And yet we root for them. And that fascinates me. They're doing the wrong thing, but for the right reason. And so that makes it okay. And that's, we're talking about the cultural turbulence that's going on. There's a lot of that going on too. We're doing the wrong thing, but we're doing it for the right reason, right? So the Byronic hero is my just all-time favorite. And so I have a tendency to write Taylor's antithesis. And Angélie is her antithesis. And the fun is putting the two characters together. You put together the completely amoral, will do anything for money, has her own code. I mean, she's not Dexter, but she has her own code of what she does and why she does it. She was born in blood. The opening pages of Whiteout, it's not a spoiler. Her entire family is assassinated at a crossroads in France. And she too is shot and left for dead and somehow manages to survive, thrive, and is raised by her uncle, who is in this dark underbelly, seedy underbelly world. And he brings her up and trains her to be that person. So she, being who she is, becomes the best at what she does. So she and Taylor truly are this mirror image of one another. She is the best bad guy, and Taylor is the best good guy. And they have to work together. And they've already come up against each other once, and they both have scars from it. That time they were not working together, but in this instance, they're going to have to work together. And it was so much fun. It was so much fun writing the two of them. I mean, they're oil and water, right? They're just gasoline and fire. The two of them are just, they'll never get along. They're never going to be friends. The banter is fabulous. And they have to find a way to achieve the same goals. And that it was just a blast to write. I had so much fun with it. And Anjali is just, she's special. She's just a special character. I rarely have characters born in blood. Taylor is not born in blood. I don't know if you and I have ever talked about this, but one of the reasons I kind of got away from these procedural books is all the female leads were born in blood. They had been either, their parent had been murdered, they had been raped, their sister had been killed. There was something that turned them into the person that they were. Taylor, on the other hand, is who she is. She's always had this absolute streak of puritanical goodness and wants to help and went to school to be a cop. She was meant to be a cop. It was her job, right? It's her passion. It was her destiny to be a cop. Her parents, her dad's a white collar criminal who was in jail, and her mom is just this vacuous socialite who, just has no idea why her daughter would be interested in law enforcement at all. And so she really does pull away from them and become this incredibly moral woman. What's interesting about that is she was so incredibly boring when I first wrote her, because people who are wholly good really are, boring. There's nothing about them. You have to have something that makes them human, right? If you've got a hero that has no flaws, then they don't sing, right? They don't come off the page. So, but when I was learning how to write, when I was writing the very first of these books that ends up being Field of Graves, which is the prequel to the series, I had her smoke. That was her flaw. She was a smoker and trying to quit and failing, I too at the time was smoking and trying to quit and failing. So, but it gave her a little bit of complexity that suddenly she's not perfect. She's not perfect. She's got this nasty habit that she is trying to kick. And that just kind of brought her to life. And then I can then string from that. That's the hook where you tie the first string. And then you can go to here, and then here, and then here, and then here. And she becomes, over the course of the series, much more gray. She is not as black and white by the end of these books. Things have happened to her that have questioned her morals. She's had to do things that she would never normally do. She has been faced, the joke is, how many serial killers can Nashville have? But she's been up against the worst of humanity and survived, but you can't do that and not be changed. So by the time we get to Wolves, she is now the creature that I always wanted her to be. She is deep, she is complex, she has a lot going on, and she's still the hero without a doubt. But if you've got a hero that's not going to arrest the anti-hero on sight, now you got something, right? Now you're cooking with fire. If they're going to have to work together and she can't just arrest her, which is what she would like to do. Boom.
Well, she can't shy away from violence. And in fact,
No.
she doesn't.
No.
What is, in fact, justice? If you think about it, what is the way to resolve a case? What if you have, a criminal, a bad actor who is unredeemable? Do you leave them to prey on other people? Do you trust in the justice system, which hardly any of us can believe anymore? What is it that this person should become as the world has evolved and as she has evolved?
And she, like the city, like us, loses her innocence. It's very easy to think that, everything you're doing is right. You're going to arrest the bad guy. They're going to go to jail. And that's the right thing to do. And, wow, you've got a death penalty and they've committed a death penalty case and they're going to be put to death. And that's what it's meant to be, because that's what the law says. And then suddenly, wait a second. We have a lot of convictions that are overturned because they're wrong. We have, John Grisham's entire mission is to try to make sure that these guys that are put on death row actually belong there, right? I mean, it just, again, the gray areas. This book was originally called The Gray Space.
Was it?
It was originally called The Gray Space because that is where she has to suddenly operate, over the series. She is no longer this cut and dried black and white good versus evil. She has been changed by the evil that she's gone up against.
But I think that title is too vague and perhaps more suited to science fiction. I don't think it represents the book as well as it could. But I was leafing through here because you have a great scene where she has to make a last minute decision, and and she does it without hesitation when it comes. And I don't, you have to be willing to take the shot, I think, to be the kind of person and the kind of cop that Taylor is. And if you dither, the bad actor often wins, because you are more dithery, whatever the word. They don't suffer any sort of moral quandary or question about whether, how things should go. So I do think too that, part of what crime fiction has to recognize right now, unlike Agatha Christie, where there was a real certainty about the justice system, she would have, and it was going to be off to the hangman, and, the judge would put out his black cap, and it was like 3 weeks, and there we were. With Christie, she always made sure that this person was guilty, so you weren't too worried that, some innocent person being hustled off to the gallows. But it's really hard to believe in the justice system anymore. There are innocent people who are incarcerated. There are, bad people let go on all kinds of technicalities. I mean, I can't remember, but there was some horrible incident that happened the other day, and the guy had just gotten released, because of the way the system works. So, I've never been a fan of series or novels where the serial killer is finally identified and he's arrested, rather than just somebody.
Oh yeah, no.
I mean,
Have to be eliminated.
see no point in that,
No.
And other people die, and yet somehow the serial killer is still standing. And I find that so unsatisfactory. I'm all for it. I feel that way about serial shooters right now. Every time I read about one, I would like to read that, somehow they took him out or her, but it's almost always him. In the process, because arresting them, trying them, going through all that, for what? You can't really recover, I mean, from something like that. I don't think that rehab is available for something like that.
No, absolutely not. I mean, it's, I have a theory that a lot of our mass shooters, the serial killer has kind of almost fallen out of favor.
That's right.
In favor of the mass shooter. And so is it that they're just starting earlier and they have the roadmap to do it? And so this is the path they're taking. I don't know. Again, culture has changed. All of our, we're in a majorly turbulent turning that we're in across the board everywhere, right? And so it has to be reflected in fiction as well as in what we see in the news. We had a school shooting here recently.
I know you did.
And I was, we had the video up within 24 hours, and we saw exactly how they did it and what they did. And they did every single thing so right and so perfect. I mean, there were cops, they were not SWAT that went in and took out the shooter. We had a patrol officer. They literally ran into the flames. And that is what I want to capture in my heroes, right? That's what I read crime fiction for, is to see how heroic people act. And yes, you have to take out the threat. The threat has to be eliminated, or else, no, it would be terribly unsatisfying to get to the end of a book and be like, okay, well, let's do our perp walk now. It's like, no. This is not Law and Order. You gotta end.
Yeah, I'm not at all convinced that the serial killer in society has disappeared. What we're seeing are people fueled by rage or sometimes just insanity. What was it that I read about the fire in I remember which African country, but I read today in the journal that they determined that this girl in the school set the fire, which ended up killing, most of the kids in the school and all, because she was angry they took away her cell phone. And, so we're getting a lot of inchoate rage that is prompting, it's mostly men, but occasionally women, to do all these things. But they're getting the media attention. I'm not totally convinced that, the serial killer has actually disappeared from society. It may be that they are just, most of the time the serial killer they divided, if you read all the studies, they're either organized or disorganized. And, much of the impulse behind it appears to be sexual, although it may simply be power grabs and other stuff. It's almost always men. They're fewer female. But all of a sudden, if you've been paying attention over the last 6 months, there are a whole bunch of serial killer thrillers suddenly coming back, and it's all women, and they are fueled by rage. They are not fueled by some sort of sexual urge as so much as they're just angry. And, this is
falling down, the girl edition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to me that the serial killer has made a comeback in a different format, as compared to Silence of the Lambs and back in that era when, it was men. And the big question, as I say, was whether they were organized or disorganized. And if they were organized, you had a better chance of finding them because there was a pattern. If they were disorganized, it was just going to be mostly complete luck, if you ran across one. So, I think in fiction, the serial killer is making a comeback in a different way. I'm not sure in life exactly where, we're going to find that but do you remember, you're probably not old enough, but there was a whole thing that went on for a while. And it started with a guy that went up in a tower in a Texas university, which one I can't remember. And he had a rifle and, he was a serial shooter, but he did it from, I don't remember which Texas university it was.
I don't know. I remember the Kent State.
That was a whole bunch of copycat, where guys would go up to towers or various things with their rifles and, pick people off. But they didn't have, AK-47s. They didn't have rapid fire or, whatever. It was more, anyway, it was a thing. And finally, the media decided that if they just didn't give these people attention, that it might quell them. And so they didn't, and it did. Because a lot of that was just, a desire to be seen, I guess. And now I think a lot of these mass shooters and all, they just want to be famous. They want they want to be seen again, some sort of. Thank you, Pat. It's the University of Texas in Austin in 1966. Patrick is doing research when I go wrong here. But really, it went on for 3 or 4 years, and that was a great decision. And, I think today, looking, the media is responsible. The whole clickbait thing is responsible for so much of what's crazy about politics and what's going on, with various crimes and so forth. If there were no attention paid to all this stuff, it might quell it. But I don't think there's much hope of that.
No,
So,
I don't either. It's funny you mentioned the clickbait. We're all zeitgeist authors, right? We're all pulling everything from the media that we consume and the culture that we live in, and it's impossible not to. So, if we're all getting the same articles, it's not surprising that we all start writing the same books, right? And the same kinds of books, and that these trends start coming back. But it is interesting. We've been talking, between the three of us, between you and me and Jane, about the female rage that is happening in fiction. And, it's really fascinating.
Here's a really creepy thing. This month, 1 week apart, I've just done one and I have one coming up. And in both cases, the center of the book and the bad actor is the Supreme Court justice. And I mean, here we are in the middle of a discussion about, what's wrong with the Supreme Court and, ethics questions and all the rest of it. And wham, in crime fiction, all of a sudden we have moved to.
But you think about, when was that written? When was that sold? When it was back during the hearings, right? And so it's just now coming to the fore. A couple of people are super smart and knew that this was going to be going on, because books don't happen overnight.
No, they don't. That's what's so interesting is that we're publishing at sort of a peak moment where this question of, whether there is, ethical questions or actual corruption, or, if there are politicians in robes or whatever way you want to look at it, when there are serious questions about the justices, or Ron DeSantis is going, put me in and I'm going to make sure it's a 7-2 conservative majority. We're going to undo everything that's ever happened, But then I remember when Earl Warren was appointed Chief Justice by Dwight Eisenhower, and he took a conservative court and decided he was going to shove it, completely in a liberal direction. So it's not like this is anything different. But I don't remember in my lifetime, I don't remember that the justices themselves have been questioned to the degree that we are suddenly hearing. Now, maybe it's because we didn't know enough. Maybe everybody kept a lid on it, but I find it, David Baldacci, I think, was the first thriller writer to ever put the president of the United States in as a bad actor. When he wrote Absolute Power, that was the first time that the president, remember, he was a serial rapist and a killer, know, and now, of course, it's fairly common that, but David was the first one to kind of take it up, to the highest power. But the justices have always been kind of inviolate. And I think it's interesting that suddenly they're not. And I think that does reflect that authors are picking up on the zeitgeist, as you say, and beginning to question whether, and it's not universal. I mean, the Ukrainians just, I think, knocked out their, their Supreme Court Chief Justice or whatever for corruption. So, but, you'd like to have thought that somehow or other, those guys would have been uncorrupt, inviolate. You really, if we wanted to believe our republic was really working, we wanted them to be like the last safeguard. And yet it's turning out that maybe that's an illusion. So, that's a great.
The question is, has it been an illusion all along?
Well, and that indeed.
Has it all just been, I mean, from the beginning of time, all of this, all of the institutions that we hold dear do have a tendency to crumble over time.
And maybe we just didn't know enough. I mean, we now know that JFK was, sleeping with everyone he could find in the Lincoln bedroom. And when Bill Clinton, and Monica Lewinsky thing came up, it was like, wow, that's the first. And the difference was then the scrutiny and so forth now is much greater. JFK got away with it with, kind of collusion from the Secret Service and everybody else. And now we know about it. But let me tell you what, since I, was alive and kicking then, we didn't know about it.
Right.
Average person did not know about it then. And now that would be almost impossible to bring off.
No, I mean, cameras, recording devices. I mean, every single thing, it's ubiquitous, right? There is no privacy. There's no privacy. We've openly we've given it away. We've given it away, and we've all kind of colluded together and say, all right, we're totally fine with not having privacy anymore. And that has to fall up, right? That has to make its way all the way to the top.
That's right. And that comes into play because there is a really nifty thing that happens in this book, which we can't talk about. But I mean, there is a really great surprise. And, it's remarkable that the people involved in it were able to bring it off, I think. So there are a lot of payoffs in this book, some of which you won't expect at all. And you've set it up so at the end, without giving anything away, you've set it up for a potential sequel. Are you actually thinking about carrying on with Taylor?
I am definitely thinking about it. I'm definitely thinking about it. I've hit, I don't know, right? It's One of Us was my 25th published novel. So I think this is 27, 26, 7. I have a couple of novels done. I'm halfway through another. Some of it's Joss Walker. So I've gotten a little confused on my timeline, but
Right.
it's like, okay, it's time to look ahead to what's happening. It's One of Us was such a seminal book for me. It took a really long time to write. It was incredibly personal. It was a really big book, right? On every
All those
level.
things.
Also felt like when tour finished and I got back and I sat at my computer, I felt like a door had closed. I really felt like, wow, I feel like I've turned the corner on my career. This was the first half of my career. Now I'm going to look at the second half of my career. I'm not as fast as Ellison Brennan. She's like way far ahead of me. We started at the same time. She's like on book 45. I think I'm on book 28, 29. But it feels like now is a really good time to assess what I want to do. And I really would like to continue this. I think I have set it up into a more modern environment where she can continue on. Taylor in 10 years ago couldn't continue on, right? There was no way to do that. I've always known though where I wanted to take her. And I think I see a path to do that. So we shall see. We shall see. It's not the book that I'm writing right now. I am writing a new standalone. But I would like to maybe start, alternating, maybe a series title and a standalone and, something like that. But it's a really interesting moment for me career-wise. I just do feel like it's One of Us closed a door that had been building toward.
Well, we've left out the fact that you wrote several books with Catherine Coulter in her universe. So you've done a number of different things. I think the fact that you can do independent publishing in a way that was not at all possible, even maybe 5 years ago, makes a big difference. So yeah, let's remember that for every book you write, there's a book you didn't write.
Correct. I mean, you just never know. Sorry.
I know. I'm sorry.
I got all choked up.
I think, we all have to think about that as we grow older. When we're young and, can conquer worlds and the whole bit, we have a lot more energy and bandwidth and we can do multiple things. But as you grow older, you have to begin to realize that for every book you write, there's a book you didn't write. It's, it's true in investments. It's the, whatever it is, lost capital or whatever principle involved. And, so I do think that this is a good time for you to, to recognize that, if you write this book, then you don't have time to write that book, and decide which ones matter to you the most. Right. You have built up a fan base so that they will follow you to Taylor and to Tales Press. If you were trying to do this as a brand new author, with no base and nobody who you were, that would be extremely difficult. So I feel that for the as yet unpublished writer, this is an incredibly difficult time because the bar to get into big publishing is so high. But independent publishing, you're just faceless among, in a vast universe of other things. I think for authors like you, independent publishing has a lot of advantages, but it's also realistic because you have achieved a fan base that, that will, as I say, will follow you because they want to know more about Taylor. They've read Taylor, they've missed Taylor, they want to know about Taylor, or they've read your other books and they haven't read Taylor, but now they're interested in reading Taylor. So, you have more choices, I think, about the way you publish, but I think you have to be more careful about what you decide to write in terms of your time.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong at all. It is, I've got a million ideas. Ideas are not my problem. Time is my problem. And, the Joss Walker series is coming to an end. That's a 6-book series, always has been 6 books and 8 short stories. And we are done with the 4th book.
Okay.
So the book 3 comes out at the end of June. Book 4 comes out the end of October. We've already plotted book 5, and she's off to the races working on that. So 5 and 6 are done next year, and then that's done, right? So that door is closed. So it's a really interesting transitional moment of what do I want to spend the rest of my career working on. I think it's interesting for the new writers coming up. They have to level up, right? They have got to be the best of the best to break in right now. And I think we're seeing some of the debuts that I've been reading are remarkable. They are light years ahead of the debuts that I was with, right? The concepts are bigger, the writing's stronger and more muscular. Everything about it is just bigger. And I think that's a really interesting thing as well, because not only is that pushing me to be a better writer, it's pushing me to look at my concepts. It's looking, how am I going to, write the books that really can make a difference and matter and have an impact on the community, on the readers, and still do the things that I love. I mean, this book took 7 months to write. It was supposed to be a short story. It was supposed to be a short story, right? Just to give the reader something, right? Just a little bit. And instead it turned into this big book that I was like, okay, well, I can do this as a full-length novel. All right, well, let's try that. I have 30,000 words on the next Samantha Owens novel. I've been sitting on that for a while, right? There's like all of these things. Ideas are not my problem. Time is my problem. Time is my problem.
It's not just writing time, it's all the other things that go with being a published author that take time. It's, book touring, it's, promotional stuff, it's all kinds of things. So,
right.
It might take you 6 months to write a book, but it's going to take you several more months of time investment to make sure that it gets to readers and, does. But, it is true that the pressure is less. I mean, the work may be more, but the pressure is less when it's you and Two Tails Press than it is in a bigger publishing environment. So that's another decision you have to make. How autonomous do you want to be? It's true you're captaining your own ship, and that takes time, but it's a different level of pressure than it is otherwise.
It's totally different. You don't have a net. Right. That's the beauty. I'm always going to be in the traditional world. This is fun. I see myself sort of as a hybrid, right? There may be stories that don't fit into the traditional path,
right,
but I can't not do them. Right. And I'm a fast writer. So I can always find a weekend to do a short story and, that kind of stuff. But it's very hard doing it yourself because you are the only person, right? You are the arbiter of all of it. It's both exciting and it is difficult because trust me, it's a lot easier to just write a book and turn it in and have somebody else edit it, do the copy for it, do the art for it, do the distribution for it, all of that. If I were to do this for myself, my God, for everything, I would have to bring somebody in to do that because I'm the writer and I want to be the writer, correct? That's always been the issue that I have with this. I might know how to do it, but I want to be the writer. I don't necessarily want to be the publisher. It is nice to have that safety net of people around you to not only do, the heavy lifting, but also to help you editorially and help you packaging and all of that. I mean, that's not something that I sneeze at. It's something that I'm really, really grateful for. And I always have been. There's just stories every once in a while that are going to come up that just need its own path, right?
The expectations are different, it's true that you have a safety net, but the safety net has all the people involved in that have an expectation level that's
sure.
different.
Yeah, so, you've got to give them a good book that can sell a lot of copies.
The stakes are
high.
So before we move to questions with Patrick, one other thing I did want to talk about is there are actually 3 points of view character in this. We have Taylor, whom we've mentioned, and then we have her the other side, the wolf character here.
The wolf.
But we have a third person called Avery, who is the mom of the girl who
Goes
runs
missing.
up the hill on the
Carson.
on the geocaching thing and perhaps witnesses the crime. And then something happens to her. And so her mom is very much involved. And what's interesting is the convergence that we end up with these three women who are the point of view characters and how it all converges at the end. So, it's a complicated story. Do you think you could have written this back at the beginning? Would you have been able to handle all of this?
No, definitely not, because it's really interesting. Sort of what I'm doing in the standalone field are, you were talking earlier about the lovely part of the police procedural is the plot, right? There are things that are going to happen, and it kind of shapes the story. All of my standalones have a cop in them because it helps me shape that story. Right. Whether they're just off they don't necessarily even have to be a point of view character, but there is a crime, obviously. And so there is a law enforcement thread that comes through it. And that's how I weave that story together. The difference between my series and my standalones, the series books, the Taylor Jackson novels, the Sam Owens, even the Catherine books, that is from the outside of the door. Right? That is a character who is going to a door, knocking on it, and wrecking somebody's life who's inside. My standalones, the characters are the ones inside the house whose door is being knocked on, who are being told what has happened, and their lives are ruined. So it's a complete, again, the mirror image of the stories, just told one's outside of the door, one's from inside the door. I tried to merge them in this book. I tried to take inside the door of Avery, and her daughter has gone missing. She's lost her husband. Her kids are grown. She's kind of lost herself. She's a doctor. She's a very smart, intelligent woman. And now her daughter has gone missing. And the cop who is knocking on her door saying, your daughter is missing. What can we do to help? And the assassin who knows why the daughter is missing, right. and is trying to subvert everyone. So it's kind of juggling these three very diametrically opposed characters who all have different goals for the story. But it all is around Carson, who is Avery's daughter. And, how do we,
and who's mostly she dead, I might add, because, we see her going up the hill and then she's gone.
And then she's gone.
She's a big presence, but she's not actually present, which I think is interesting. So, this is, I think, a story that would be very difficult for a novice writer to construct. However, back to your point about all the good debuts you've been reading, I've been talking to a lot of them because we try very hard to give debuts attention. And it's surprising not surprising, that's the wrong word. Most of them have been 2, 3, 4 years in their journey towards publication. Most of them have had extensive rewriting. They've had, concept editors, sensitivity, whatever it is. In other words, it's a lot different than when, a manuscript used to fly over the door and somebody would read it from the slush pile and go, wow, here's a great book.
Oh, that's right.
It's much more, it's not like television where you have a writing room, but it's much more of a team production in these big debuts from these big houses where there are big stakes. It's not really just the writer, turning in a book and everybody goes, yay. There's a huge development process that goes on. I talked to one earlier today, and actually she'd written like 2 or 3 other books before she decided she really wanted to try a thriller. And those other books, when the thriller was written, her agent was more excited about the thriller than the other books. And so the other books are still there, and the thriller went out, and then it's had a whole lot of development. So I think, the process to publication for a new author in a major publishing house is a lot different than it was when you started.
Yeah, that does sound very different.
Yeah, so, the stakes are higher, the money is higher. But as you point out, the books are perhaps bigger, impressive, and under a lot of pressure to justify everything that went into them. So that's why I'm so grateful that there are smaller presses that give people a chance to, tell their stories and hone their craft and, find an audience and do all those things, because not everybody wants to write a blockbuster. I know, you'd think that every author's dream is to be a New York Times bestseller, but I'm not sure that's really true. I think many people, their dream is just to get their story out there and
Yeah.
find readers. And, I can remember authors. I had a note today from an author who I've been with since the very beginning and is coming up on a major anniversary. And that author's journey has been totally different than it would be for somebody publishing a first novel today with the same publisher. It just couldn't happen that way anymore.
Yeah, no, the standards are very different. I mean, it's always been hard, right? It's always been hard to get published. You're the 1% of the 1%. It's hard to get an agent. It's hard for the agent to sell the book. But in this environment, I think it's even harder than it ever has been to break in. And, if they see a book that they know is going to be a big bestseller, they snatch it up. And then I think they're letting a lot of other things just go by the wayside. And
well,
that's happened before, though. I mean, again, with the cyclical sine waves of all of this, it just,
there are smaller stories.
We go vertical.
What it really comes down to, JT, is there are smaller stories that are just as
impactful,
interesting and worthy and fun as the really high concept books. I have to read a lot of high concept books, and while I admire them, sometimes I'm just exhausted. And I think, I'd rather have a smaller, friendlier book, that I could read and, don't have to be totally torn up by the stakes. I mean, not every reading experience has to be, like the Avengers or something, sometimes you just want a smaller world. Anyway, Patrick, come and tell us whether we're getting any response or whether everything we've said is arousing ire.
I don't know about that. Let's see. Well, I tried to get Jane Ann to come on screen, but just couldn't rouse her, although she is lurking in the notes here.
Okay.
She actually has a really good question, kind of apropos of what you've been discussing. She says, so is the mission of crime fiction to establish and affirm a moral compass for the reader and then question it and then affirm it or something like that?
Wow, great question.
That's a brilliant question. Do you want to handle it? I know my answer.
No, I think Jane should answer it. We're not going to get her on screen to do it. So go with yours.
I think absolutely. I think that's our job. We have to challenge the reader to think a different way, because just like me, when I first started out with there's good and there's evil and there's nothing in between. No, of course, there's many things in between. And we have to take the reader to a point where they're uncomfortable, I think, and then give them the satisfaction that they deserve for going through that process. What is she saying? Is she saying I'm absolutely nuts? She might be saying I'm absolutely nuts.
Oh, no. I mean, I think one of the reasons the Golden Age mysteries are having quite a comeback and, classics and all is because there was always an expectation that justice would be served and that there was a moral framework and a moral compass and so forth. And one of the reasons I get kind of tired of some of the big twisty whatever it is that isn't always the case. It's interesting that in the big twisty thrillers and so forth that justice has a different face and it isn't always affected. And sometimes I find that very unsatisfying.
So is it safe to say that the job of crime fiction is to provide a satisfying read?
I think so. But the thing is that what's going to be satisfying for one reader isn't necessarily going to be true for another. So I think it has to be satisfying for the author. And if the author is satisfied, then, that's the real That's the real standard there. And the author, if satisfied, will therefore be persuasive.
No, good point.
What do you think, Patrick? Chime in here. You're a big reader of all
Yeah,
this.
you're a huge crime fiction. What do you think?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, in some ways, it's like, do we really want a book that kind of spoon feeds you this reality that everything that you think and believe is correct, and affirming that, or do you want something that's gonna challenge it? I don't know.
You
It's a
want
good question.
everything that in the book to be corrupt. I mean, that's the other side of it.
Well, yeah. I mean, and there's certain types of books that, like you read a James Ellroy novel, and it's like just when you think you've peeled the last level of corruption and it couldn't get any darker and deeper, he peels another one off, But then there are other books that are, and I think it depends upon your mood. And I think, Barbara, you're absolutely right. It's like if the author isn't buying it, and if they're not sold on what they're trying to present, then the reader shouldn't be either.
There's a really interesting book coming out in July by Alex Hayes called The Housekeepers. It's a debut.
I've got it. I've read it.
All right. So, how would you say that book ends? Do you think justice is served? Do you think, who gets, I mean, it's a very complex book with a lot of payoffs. I found it fascinating. I really did.
Yeah. No, it is definitely worth reading. Definitely worth reading. He's awesome. I did his very first signing ever was in Seattle at we were up there together at ABA, and he was like, all right, you're gonna have to tell me what to do. And I'm like, what do you mean? He was like, this is my first time. 2 seconds later, he had a line 40 women deep, swooning. He's British, adorable.
That helps a lot, right?
Swooning, and I'm like, yeah, you don't need my help. you got this well in hand. It's it's an interesting concept. I thought it was very cool. Ocean's 11 meets Downton Abbey.
Yeah, but if you think about it, there are a number of different moralities. There are a number of different payoffs. There is no one thing that comes to resolution in that story, but rather multiple things. And I think that's fascinating. So, Dan, I can't really fully answer your question.
There are some good comments that are coming in. Well, let's see. I mean, there's a little debate here going on, I think, about what constitutes automatic weaponry and semi-auto and so forth, which we won't get into here. But let's see here. Yeah, Jane Ann says, Patrick reads noir, which is the gray zone. What does he think is the mission? Interesting. The mission, I don't know. I think that, maybe we want to, sometimes if it's unpleasant, the story can go in an unpleasant direction, but it's absolutely right for the story. It's whatever satisfies you at that moment. I think people are drawn to different crime fiction for different reasons. People want, they want that tidy resolution, and other people just want to relate to a character going through something, which may be an ordeal. I don't know.
Don't you think readers can be drawn to different kinds of crime?
Absolutely. Yeah. And at different times, sometimes,
exactly.
I mean, I'm kind of typecast as the noir guy, but I don't always want to read a heavy duty noir, Sometimes, it's just like, oh my God, I don't want to go through this.
The queen of military fiction. I mean, is that the last thing that you would have imagined? I mean, I'm basically a romance reader, suddenly, off there, in the South Sea with China and Taiwan. And I mean, really, I think, crime fiction is great because it's such a broad umbrella. And you can be an omnivorous reader like me. Patrick really is too. He's right that he kind of gets typecast, but he's not. I think it allows a huge range of, stories and payoffs and ethical questions and all that, and that's why I think real readers have multiple books. I've always remembered, I've said this story before, but it was a defining moment for me years and years ago. We had our little tiny first bookstore. It's only like 650 square feet or something. Patrick, you might remember him, although I'm not sure you had come to work yet, but we had a customer who was a doctor from Boston who was a great book collector. And he would come to Phoenix for medical conferences, and he loved crime fiction. So he would come into the store and he would spend hours. I mean, he would go around whatever stock we had, and he would, select, and he would buy all kinds of books. I admit that at one point I got kind of irritated because he thought of me as like a scrub nurse, and he wanted me to go behind him carrying the books. So I disabused him of that. But anyway, after some years, one day he came in with his wife. Never met her before, happy to see her. And we had this big chair that was kind of in front of the checkout desk, because it was you've never seen that store. So she sat in the chair, and he started his going down the aisles, making happy sounds. And after about 15 minutes, she stood up and banged her arms on the chair, and she said, I won't give his name, "It's time to go." She said, "You already have a book." And I realized right at that moment, the gulf between them. And I wondered how they even stayed married, because readers would never say, "I have a book," right? And a non-reader would go, "You have a book," right? It was just, that gap, I think, is terrific, because you never know, if you're a reader, what you're in the mood to read.
Right. I walked out of the bookstore today. I had to go down and sign books at our local store. And I walked out with the nonfiction. What did I do with it? I think I left it in the car. And I forget the name, but it's the big nonfiction #1 on the list about the ship battles.
Oh, the wager.
Thank you. The wager. That's
Yeah,
it.
David, whatever his name is. He's been a big bestseller before, but anyway, The Wager. Yeah, it's
it just, I've seen it. I've seen that book over and over and over. It's not something I normally read. It's just certainly not what I normally read, but it just looks really interesting, and it's got a gorgeous cover, and I'm like, well, why not? Right. And that's the beauty of being a reader. The why not? I'll try it. Why not? What do I have to lose? A few hours of time if I don't like it, a few days of enjoyment if I do. Awesome.
And the discipline to put it down if you're not liking it, and not feel compelled to read it all the way to the end.
That's hard. I have a hard time with that. I have a really hard time with that.
More questions, Patrick?
Well, I mean, crime fiction can do so much, I mean, it can entertain, of course, but it can also kind of shine a light on society and what's going on, at street level and cities. What are the real problems? And some people are drawn to that and are interested in that, what's going on in society via the crime novel, issues of justice and things like that. And other people don't really want to read about that. They want the plot, So there's no real right answer. That's why well, for instance, yesterday, and it can deal with some difficult taboo topics. Like yesterday I did a program with Ivy Pagoda, who, as you were talking about, female rage or whatever. She has a new book out called Sing Her Down. And it deals with this issue of, why is it that men are allowed to have these violent tendencies, and this innate violent tendencies, and women aren't. And when a woman, has these violent tendencies, it's always explained away as, well, this must be because of some experience that she had at the hands of a male, and why can't a woman just be violent and have these things? A really provocative topic, and she explores it, and it's going to make a lot of readers uncomfortable, but
I have it up next.
There you go.
I can't wait to read it, because
everybody should read it, and I really enjoyed it.
That's the fun of our book selling life, is that we were able to segue from Ivy to Jane Austen, just bang.
Exactly.
I love the fact that, you get to do that, and recognize just how, as I said, how broad the umbrella of fiction is. Not just crime fiction, but fiction.
Right.
Nonfiction. I mean, there's an increasing number of what the oxymoronic term, narrative nonfiction. But
Right.
basically, what it really means is that somebody's taking storyteller talents and applying it to real events. So it's not dry, to read it, it's engaging. And I think the line is often blurred between fiction and narrative nonfiction. And certainly when you're writing, books where real characters are involved, there's a kind of narrative biographical thing that comes into it. And we're seeing a lot of that where actual figures are being deployed as lead characters in fiction. So that's interesting too, I think.
It is. I've got a couple of my best friends are historical fiction writers who Ariel Lawhon, Patty Callahan Henry, they have a real person and they have to build a world around them. I mean, Ariel's got a new book coming out called The Frozen River, about a midwife in the 1700s who never lost a child. And the only record is her diary. That's it. So she has to build an entire world around her and interpret what all of that is. That's incredible talent. I could never pull that off. I think our historical fiction writers are really talented.
Lady Tian and Her Circle of Women, the new Lisa C novel, man, it just blew me away. I mean, it's basically about, childbirth and gynecology and foot binding and all of these medical practices and so forth in 15th century China, and what they knew and what they didn't know. And I find it unbelievable that she has created this world that it's totally foreign to us, and yet so, I hate this word, and so relatable. But I couldn't put it down. I mean, I read it from cover to cover, just bang, wow. I'm looking forward to talking to her about it, and sort of scared to do it because I don't know that I'll do it justice, but we'll see.
Oh.
Lisa's talk, not mine, so it'll be fine. What else, Patrick?
Well, yeah, I don't want to get into some of this stuff.
I didn't mean to bring up political stuff. Sorry.
No. It is interesting. I remember hearing Val McDermott say something about how the thriller, and this is a totally broad canvas, but the thriller tends to skew right and the crime novel tends to skew left, which I find interesting. I don't know if it's quite so neat along that line, because you do see
it's an interesting, very interesting.
Well, I guess if you're looking at the military thrillers and that is interesting. God,
yeah, I'm gonna have to.
Val said it. We have to pay attention too because she's smart.
Well, I think maybe she just meant that the crime fiction or whatever is, like I was talking about earlier, is the emphasis can be on exploring social stuff, social issues and things like that. So maybe that's what she meant, as opposed to just simply catching the bad guy, the quote bad guy, which tends to be the focus on a lot of thrillers. And what is a bad guy? Well, the crime fiction will explore that. Whereas the thriller is just maybe more black and white, but I'm getting myself into trouble by even saying that. So I won't, because I don't believe in those kind of strict definitions, because there's always exceptions on both sides.
Sure.
So with that, I'll shut up.
Does that mean we're done?
Let's see. Okay. Yeah, I think we're done.
Okay. Well, it's been a treat, as always, to talk to you, JT. We always go in all kinds of interesting directions. So I'm sorry if I got slightly carried away politically, but every once in a while I do, although I try not to. But it's hard to see what's going on in the world around us and not have some sort of opinion one way or another. So, everybody's opinion is valid for the person who holds it. That's how it is. Right.
Absolutely.
Anyway, let me go back and say once again that The Wolves Come at Night, out yesterday from Two Tails Press. I'm going to remind you once again, if you tuned in late, look how absolutely gorgeous this book is. Wow. Anyway, and JT will sign copies for us when we send her an order. So I'm going to give you maybe 10 days or 2 weeks to do that. And then we will get your book for you. And I think you'll love it. I certainly did. I read it all in one gulp and thoroughly enjoyed it. It's great storytelling, got wonderful characters in it, got a couple of real knockout surprises, and justice in various ways is effected. So
We still have some signed copies of It's One of Us as well.
oh, we do, right. We have a couple left of, and we don't have time to go back into that, but an amazing book and a very personal story dealing with issues that are very tough for women and for couples, for men too, which is infertility. So very thoughtful book and very powerful book. Good for you for writing it. Must have been sort of like stripping naked in public.
Yes, yes, it has been. Yes, it has been. I am a very personal I don't like, I mean, I write under a pen name for a reason, right? I don't like to put myself out there. And that was definitely all me. And it was really hard. And I think I maybe did kind of maybe slam the door kind of hard when it was over, just to stop being so transparent, because it's difficult. It's a difficult conversation. But the beautiful thing is I have heard from so many people who have said, thank you. Thank you for making me cry. I've needed to. Thank you for talking about something that I've never seen talked about before. And that's why I did it, right? If I can help somebody else, then that's all that matters. So we've got the book to help people and the book to entertain people and rock and roll.
Here we are. Right. Well, it's been a joy as always. So thank you very much for joining us, everybody. Good night. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Bye, hon.
Hey,
Bye.
that was fun.
That was fun. What is happening in the comments? Now you're freaking me out. Is it
Nothing.
bad?
No, let me hold on a second. Not at all.
Okay. God, I was like, oh no, what did I say?
No. Let me just stop the